Hello and welcome to PROD 1012, Managing Linux in the Cloud with SUSE Manager, where we'll show you all sorts of fun stuff you can do with SUSE Manager in the public clouds. My name is Neil Bornstein. I'm a senior sales engineer with SUSE based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And with me is
Don Vosberg. I'm product manager for SUSE Manager, and I'm based out of Indiana, USA.
so Don and I have together been doing this session for, well, we'll say quite a while. And we thought we might make some changes this year just to mix it up a little bit. So how we're doing that is just summed up right here in this one tweet. SUSE Manager can manage all your Linux in any deployment environment at any scale. Well, what does that really mean? Basically, it means as long as there's a network connection from the managed system to a SUSE Manager server or proxy, SUSE Manager can manage it. And that means at any scale, no matter from 10 to tens of thousands of systems or more, we can manage it. Any architecture, SUSE Manager can manage Intel, uh, IBM Power, mainframes, Raspberry Pis, any architecture, any Linux, not only managing SUSE Linux, but our competitors like Red Hat, open source options like Ubuntu, and tons of others in any cloud. And of course, all these come with certain caveats. At any scale means, well, you might need our hub architecture, which we don't talk about in this presentation, but there's other sessions about it. Any architecture,
Usually only if you have more than 10,000 managed systems.
correct. Any architecture means any of those four that we mentioned. We're not going to manage any really obscure architectures. Any Linux, well, you see the list here. It really is a pretty extensive list. If there's something that's not on here that you're interested in, we'd encourage you to go to our upstream project, Uyuni, and talk to the community there, and chances are we can get it added. And then any cloud. That means really the big three, Amazon EC2, Microsoft Azure, and the Google Compute Engine. There's also support in Google Cloud and, in Oracle Cloud and Alibaba Cloud. So any cloud means any of the big clouds that you're commonly going to see.
And our common experience that we're sharing in this presentation is really around the big three
Yep.
Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Compute Platform, Cloud Platform.
Absolutely. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, but don't cloud instances manage themselves? I mean, that's what my hyperscaler of choice is telling me. That's not really always true. There's a lot of things that you need to be aware of in the cloud. For example, security exposure. Even though there are security tools in the clouds, sometimes the exposure can be even higher in the cloud than it would be on-prem, depending on how you set things up. And that goes for the software supply chain as well. There's lots of marketplace images out there, and the provenance of those images might not be very clearly identified. You don't control the upstream like you do when you're deploying on-prem. You still need to audit CVEs and schedule updates and patches on the cloud, just like on-prem. You don't get to just ignore those sort of things. And you might have multiple landscapes, multiple regions, multiple environments that you need to stage patching across, because you want to make sure you have a consistent set of patches in a controlled manner across all those different environments.
I always used to call it in carpentry, measure twice, cut once.
That's a great adage. So SUSE Manager has some unique capabilities in the cloud. Here's four things that we think make it different from any of the competitors out there. The first one is really exciting in that we can manage both pay-as-you-go and bring your own subscription instances from SUSE Manager. You can buy your subscriptions through whichever route you prefer. We can support it either way. And that includes reserved instances and committed use discounts that the hyperscalers can provide. Another great unique capability is that the ability to manage with SUSE Manager is included in SLES for SAP at no extra charge when you buy through the cloud marketplace. If you're buying bring your own subscription, you can add it very easily at a very low cost. Now, we can also manage other Linux distributions, and this truly is a unique capability. The ability to manage, about a dozen different distributions from a single tool, both on-prem and in the cloud, across different architectures from a single console is truly unique. And then the final unique capability is really about CVE auditing. There's other tools that allow you to patch your instances in the cloud, but we allow you to understand your security posture and then patch from the same tool. These are all very unique capabilities. So what does the architecture look like? Here's an example of a cloud-only SUSE Manager architecture. You can see in the middle the SUSE Manager server, and on the right, a user managing it from the console. In the cloud, and again, this is a cloud-only architecture, you can actually obtain the software repositories from a SUSE managed repository in the cloud, so that you don't have to reach out to SUSE Customer Center unless you're bringing your own subscription. And then you can...
And a fun fact about that SUSE pay-as-you-go cloud repository, that infrastructure is all managed with SUSE Manager. Pretty cool.
It's turtles all the way down. And then in the bottom of this chart, you see proxies. The SUSE Manager proxy is also included with the SUSE Manager entitlement. And we do recommend using a proxy if you're managing across multiple cloud regions. Now, this is a cloud-only architecture. Let's take a look at a hybrid cloud architecture. And this begins to look more like a traditional SUSE Manager architecture that you will have seen in our documentation before. Again, you have SUSE Manager running in the cloud, and you're able to subscribe it to the SUSE Customer Center or to the repository management tool that you would run in the cloud yourself, or in the instance of pay-as-you-go subscriptions, you can actually connect it to our SUSE-provided pay-as-you-go infrastructure as well. And then down at the bottom, again, you see the proxies, but you can have a proxy connect to your systems on-prem or in private cloud. And this is recommended, this proxy architecture is recommended for on-prem management from the cloud, just to cut down on network traversal charges. And speaking of networks, it is important to consider all the different ports and connections that you need open between the SUSE Manager server, proxies, and clients. So if you're establishing SUSE Manager servers and clients in the cloud, make sure your network security groups account for these various ports.
In addition to this being in our slide deck, it's also in the documentation for SUSE Manager. So if you're setting it up and architecting this for the first time, it might be a useful exercise to compare that to your network security settings that you have in your hypervisor of choice. So SUSE Manager server in the cloud, we don't actually charge a subscription for the SUSE Manager server itself. So the infrastructure for both SUSE Manager server and the proxy is available to you by subscribing your client systems with Lifecycle Management Plus in the case of BYOS, or in PayG if you have SLES for SAP, as Neil referred to earlier. You get the entitlement from your SLES for SAP pay-as-you-go instance. Or if you need to connect other ones, in previous days you had to buy LCM Plus to cover your cloud pay-as-you-go instances also. But we're starting a new path this summer that's coming up. So in the case of your SUSE Manager server, obviously you want to size it correctly because your CSP is going to charge you for that infrastructure as a service, the storage and networking and CPU usage and size of it. There's guidance in the documentation that allow you to do that. We create images for both the proxy and the SUSE Manager server on at least a quarterly basis. Sometimes those are refreshed more often, and some of it depends on security vulnerabilities that may need to be remedied in the image itself. But in all three of the majors, we have very active image development and creation for all the currently supported versions of SUSE Manager. So try to pick one that's pretty recent, but you should be able to find those. And they may be a community labeled as a community offering simply because those images are BYOS and are not purchased through any marketplace on any of the hyperscalers. But what's coming this summer is what I'm going to explain next. That we're starting with AWS and turning a new page and trying something different for pay as you go. So pay as you go SUMA, which again, you're not paying the hyperscaler for the software for the server. What happens is it automatically allows you, once you register your pay as you go instance to that pay as you go SUSE Manager, the billing is sent up through the hyperscaler. We're starting with AWS because we have way more less pay as you go instances running in AWS than we do on either of the other two hyperscalers. So we're starting there because we're trying to answer the market need for this. So your Lifecycle Management Plus for that is not something you have to directly buy from SUSE. It will go right through AWS. So if you have discounted arrangements with the hyperscaler, those you can take full advantage of this way. And you don't need a SUSE Customer Center account to do this. It will use that registered instance to determine your eligibility for mirroring content inside of SUSE Manager, and then work on a monthly billing cycle for your instance. Now, those of you who are using pay as you go SLES for SAP, it still has LCM Plus included, so you don't get billed any extra for that. It just becomes part of the infrastructure. And you can onboard clients in the normal ways to SUSE Manager, and that monthly cycle gets calculated on average and reported to AWS by the SUMA pay-as-you-go instance. So, so hopefully this will begin a process for us of doing it with other hyperscalers, and we're measuring the success. And we'd love to get feedback from you once this comes out. It did not make it to 4.3.6, but it's coming. We're targeting 4.3.7. End of July is the time frame that we're looking at right now, but I can't make a real commitment to that because it's forward looking and it's more than a month, so I'm not allowed to actually tell you. But it is coming, and we've done a tremendous amount of engineering work and cooperation with our cloud engineering team to make this happen.
So, Don, this is a great option for our customers who really want to buy everything through the marketplace and not have to have a split purchasing model.
Exactly. And it got very confusing when how do I know what channels I'm entitled to when everything I bought is through the hyperscaler marketplace, and why can't I get the things I'm entitled to through that way? And now you'll actually be able to do that. For
Awesome.
beginners, we're trying to keep it from being confusing. So we're saying really only use the pay as you go SUMA instance that's going to build through the hyperscaler for cloud related pay as you go
Right.
clients. And of course, you can always build another SUSE manager. You can have multiple SUSE managers and use inner server sync if you need to have on-prem plus that. There's lots of ways for you to separate it, but at least for the beginning purposes, for clarity, for channel content syncing and entitlement, we're trying to keep those isolated from each other. But
Awesome.
yeah, and this explains exactly why. With BYOS Suma, which is the way it's always been, you purchase that Lifecycle Management Plus from SUSE, or in case of SUSE Manager for Retail, you use the retail branch server as an entitlement for SUSE Manager for its clients, and mirror the repositories from SCC, so they're coming through your SUSE Customer Center entitlement account. And pay as you go Linux, you acquire the registration code from SUSE. If you don't have any LCM Plus previous, and you're just running SLES for SAP in the public cloud with entitlement, you can send an email. There's instructions on how to do that from your SE, or you can email either of us. And then mirror repositories actually connecting to a pay-as-you-go instance. One of the resources that we have at the end of this deck is a blog with a video explaining that and links and all that stuff. With pay-as-you-go Suma, you're mirroring repositories by connecting through that pay-as-you-go instance to the cloud infrastructure. So it's all pulling it from that same hyperscaler's infrastructure.
And of course, the fourth quadrant here, pay as you go Suma with BIOS Linux is not currently supported. So if you're
That's what I
bringing,
was trying to
yeah,
explain earlier. Yeah, just to keep the model as clean as
right,
possible.
exactly. If you're
And
bringing
again,
your
you're
own
not incurring
Linux,
extras. Yeah, you're not incurring extra software costs from SUSE to build out
right,
more SUSE Manager infrastructure. It's just trying to keep it so that billing is going the right directions, and you're entitled to what you should be entitled to.
cool.
Right. Okay. So managing pay-as-you-go instances, um, and adding repositories to SUSE Manager. So if you do nothing with your pay-as-you-go instance for SUSE Manager, if you just purchase it through the marketplace, it automatically knows it's entitled to get updates through that cloud on the SUSE side RMT infrastructure. So now we can use those repositories also. So um, these they just show up in the channels once you have gone through this process on the SUSE Manager server side. So you have to be able to SSH from the SUSE Manager server to one of these entitled systems, and there's a setup wizard for pay as you go, and you click on add pay as you go client. You put in the credentials, the same ones that you would use SSH to connect to that client. Otherwise, and you can use user and password or an SSH key. It is You may have to do some figuring, but usually that part, once you negotiate it, is good. So it means that I've got to be able to DNS resolve to that host, or I use the IP address, right? And then SUSE Manager enumerates the entitled repositories in products. So it appears in products just like regular SUSE Manager. And there's documentation and a video of it. So if you need to see it, you can do that. It's really only a few minutes. Just like with SUSE Manager on-prem, you'll get all your repositories from Customer Center for the BYOS instances, and they're aligned to your entitlement through LCM Lifecycle Management Plus is what LCM Plus stands for, subscriptions from SUSE. And you as always, when you register a system in the public cloud, if you do nothing for the local host name, uh, The salt minion, that is the client registration from SUSE Manager, will use that host name to register it. So if it has something like an IP address and the really long string that sometimes automated DNS with DHCP names it in a hyperscaler, that's what it's going to look like in SUSE Manager. So it's not really great. So try to set it to something appropriate before you register those cloud
Yeah,
instances.
we've seen some monsters come out
Yeah,
of the hyperscalers.
super long. I mean, it's like, okay, wow. Well, and it makes it really hard once after the system's registered to do sub portfolio actions where I'm trying to group systems together and take actions on them, remote command, patch updates, all those other things. If my host names are set to something that aligns with a naming standard for the rest of my systems, or some way to group them, it's much
Yeah,
easier.
definitely.
So, as we've mentioned before, all the proxy and server images are available in the marketplace today, and you can actually search for them, and then you can follow the setup instructions. So it's obviously shortcutted from what you might do on premise because you're working from a pre-established image at the beginning. It still requires, on the BYOS side, it still requires that proxy or that server be registered to SCC in order to get updates. On the new pay as you go one, it automatically registers to the RMT infrastructure in the public cloud. And it does not do that with what we have now. So if you need a proxy, you can use that proxy image that's out there in the cloud. And we recommend that to help you with scalability, with moving content closer to where the clients are in a different cloud region, for example, or maybe even in a different network subnet, or however you've aligned your client systems. And that proxy can be a VM, or with SUSE Manager 4.3, we introduced a containerized proxy method, and we really recommend that you do that for the cloud. That is going to be the only offering for the new pay-as-you-go SUMA. So you need to use a SLES 15 SP3, 4, or 5 instance and register it with SUSE Manager. It tells you how to install the one package that you need. It has dependencies. It pulls in Podman as one of its dependent packages. And then there's containerized proxy setup that's actually quite a bit simpler. You don't have any special repositories that you have to mirror on the SUSE Manager server. The only consideration is make sure you've got enough disk space, and varlib container storage is where that's stored. So
Do-
that's it.
Don, do I need to know anything about containers, Docker, Kubernetes, Helm charts, all that kind of stuff to deploy the
Nope,
containerized proxy?
it's no, and that's a good question, Neil. So this Uyuni proxy system D services sets up the system D services that will launch the Podman containers that align with SUSE Manager proxy. So there's 5 of them, but there's a single service that calls all 5, pulls in the container images, and spins them up. So the instructions are really useful for that, and you don't need to be a Kubernetes expert in order to use it.
Cool.
Like Neil's an
I
expert,
try.
right? So there's some common pitfalls and mistakes, and we would be remiss if we hadn't mentioned these. So allocate enough disk space. Okay, that sounds like a big duh, but in the cloud, there is a script that you run called Suma Storage that can use an extra volume that you have attached, but that's a fixed size. So make sure that that size is big enough before you attach that volume to your SUSE Manager server. And remember that the more distributions that you use and the more versions and the more architectures like Neil's talked about, the bigger that grows. And it can get very large. I have a server with 2.6 terabytes right now of mirrored content. Um, Make sure that PostgreSQL storage is created correctly, and that Summa storage script should run before PostgreSQL is installed, or you can rerun the PostgreSQL install if you add the storage after. Um, there's a swap file that you can make on your cached disk. That is a useful thing. You can assign persistence FQDN. You're going to have to do this to your for both the SUSE Manager server and the proxy. Even the containerized proxy needs an established FQDN because this is what it uses in certificates for all the communication that SUSE Manager does with clients and with proxy. Um, and then that machine ID on managed systems, if you're using an image where you accidentally might have stored the machine ID, you may run into this problem where the next time I spin one up, I only have one system registered because it booted out the previous one. It's not a good thing. Uh, Disconnect any managed systems from pay as you go repositories. Otherwise, they keep re-registering themselves. So this is less of a problem in the pay-as-you-go system manager, but in the BYOS, it definitely is. And then, of course, be aware of egress charges. Everything that comes into the cloud, they love. Everything that goes out of the cloud is on the ticker. So be really careful with that. And where you place proxies really matters. And as Neil pointed out, in a hybrid environment, it may make more sense for you to have, if you have a large number of on-premises systems, to put the SUSE Manager server there and proxies up in the clouds.
Right.
So there's a nice set of tools that somebody you might recognize wrote. There's some these scripts help you in client system preparation. It's up there on a GitHub site um, as a gift to you. One that removes and resets all the machine ID, and then there's a prep one that checks to make sure that Salt Minion isn't previously installed, which might be an old version or an unsupported version. And then during the registration process, that will get laid down with the latest one from your server. And then obviously, we talked about swap file creation. There's a script to be able to do it. So, what is it that you want to be done? We've been testing SUSE Manager with RDS actually in the last 12 months. We did some testing. Setup is non-trivial at the moment, but we did validate that it can work to have a separate database. Now, RDS, for example, this is an Amazon service. It's more expensive than running it in your own instance. So you have to weigh the benefits and the costs, right? But if this matters to you, we would love to be able to hear from you. We're looking toward modularization and for SUSE Manager in the 5.0 timeframe, which will come next year, where the server will be containerized and separating services like this makes sense. Would you like to be able to run it, if it is containerized, on a cloud Kubernetes service like Amazon EKS or AKS in Azure? What would you like to see in SUSE Manager for cloud management? We really want to know and would love to hear from you.
And this is the man to talk to right here. Mr. Vosberg, as product manager, is in charge of getting information from our customers. So tell
And
him.
we have a weekly meeting each summer. File, this year it's July 10th to 15th, where we'll be in Nuremberg, Germany, doing planning and consideration of all of these things. And the roadmap items are a constant feedback from customer, where's the community heading, where's the competitive landscape look like, all those things. That's part of the fun of what I get to do. There are some resources you can look at here. The product page for SUSE Manager will give you some cloud specific things. There's a download page if you need to get a key for SUSE Manager and you want to try it out. This is a way to do that. So you can actually get a trial key through this download page for SUSE Manager and spin it up in the cloud and use that registration key. There's obviously documentation for 4.3 is all out there, plus the specific stuff that we referenced earlier. And this blog for SLES for SAP is one there as well. At SUSECon this year, there's a number of really great SUSE Manager sessions besides what Neil has put together for this one. The ones in green on this page are ones that will be in person in Munich. And I'm going to be there presenting one of these. And then the ones in black are ones that are digital only. But all of the content, whether it's in person or digital, will be made available starting the 28th of June, 2023. And recordings of these things will be something you can review. And if you didn't have time to attend these in person or otherwise, you can go back later at your leisure and be able to access them. Thank you again. And Neil, you want to say thanks too?
Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for attending. For the, if this is your first time watching us talk, or the seventh,
the sixth time, seventh time, whatever.
Hopefully you got some new content out of it, because things are always changing. And we certainly hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.